I'm standing in my own kitchen, watching strangers carry boxes through my front door while my sister Janet directs them. Like she owns the place. My hands are shaking as I dial 911 because 5 minutes ago my own mother looked me dead in the eye and said the words that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. You don't have a family anymore, Almeida. We're taking what should have been ours from the beginning. The worst part. They had keys. 5 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 23, working as a marketing coordinator at Brighton Creative, a mid-sized advertising firm in downtown Denver. My cubicle overlooked the mountains, and I genuinely loved crafting campaigns for local restaurants and boutique shops. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it covered my studio apartment rent and left enough for weekend adventures with friends. Then, the recession hit our industry like a sledgehammer. Brighton Creative lost 3 major clients in 1 month. The layoffs started with the newest hires, which meant me. I'll never forget that Tuesday morning when my supervisor, Kevin Martinez, called me into the conference room with the frosted glass walls. He couldn't meet my eyes as he explained that my position was being eliminated immediately. Walking out of that building with my personal items in a cardboard box felt surreal. I kept thinking it was temporary, that another opportunity would appear within weeks. I was young, educated, and eager. How hard could it be to find another marketing job? Reality crushed those illusions quickly. Every application disappeared into digital black holes. The few interviews I managed to secure ended with polite rejections and vague promises to keep my resume on file. My unemployment benefits barely covered rent on my cramped studio near Capitol Hill, leaving me surviving on generic ramen noodles and whatever free samples I could gather at the grocery store. The worst part wasn't the financial struggle, it was watching my family's reaction. My mother, Carol, had always been the type of woman who measured success in dollar signs and job titles. She worked as a branch manager at First National Bank and prided herself on never missing a day of work in 23 years. When I called to tell her about the layoff, her first response wasn't sympathy or support. "Well, what did you do wrong?" she asked, her voice sharp through the phone. "Companies don't just fire people for no reason, Almeida." My sister Janet, 2 years older and working as a restaurant manager at an upscale steakhouse, was equally unsympathetic. During what became our final phone conversation that autumn, she lectured me about personal responsibility and making better choices. When I tried to explain that the entire marketing industry was struggling, she cut me off. "Successful people find ways to succeed regardless of circumstances," Janet declared. "Maybe this is a wake-up call that you need to try harder." My brother Derek, the baby of the family at 21, simply stopped returning my calls altogether. He was busy with his new job at Henderson Investment Group, working in their pension management department. The few times I managed to reach him, he acted like my unemployment was somehow contagious. The isolation became complete during the holidays. Thanksgiving arrived with no invitation to the traditional dinner at Mom's house. When I called to ask about plans, Carol's response was icy. "We're keeping it small this year," she said. "Just immediate family." The implication was clear. I was no longer considered immediate family. Christmas morning, I sat alone in my studio apartment, watching snow accumulate on the fire escape outside my single window. I could hear families in adjacent units laughing and unwrapping presents. The silence in my own space felt suffocating. I tried showing up at family gatherings anyway, hoping things would improve. At Carol's birthday party in January, I arrived with a small gift I'd managed to scrape together money for. The reception was glacial. Conversations stopped when I entered rooms. People suddenly found excuses to step outside or check their phones. I lasted 37 minutes before the humiliation became unbearable. The anxiety attack started in February. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning with my heart racing, convinced I was having a medical emergency. The walls of my studio felt like they were closing in. I developed insomnia, spending nights staring at the ceiling and replaying every family interaction, searching for clues about what I'd done wrong. Dr. Patricia Morris, a therapist I found through a sliding scale clinic, helped me understand that my family's abandonment wasn't really about my unemployment. It was about their own fears and prejudices, their inability to offer unconditional support during difficult times. Sometimes, Dr. Morris explained, during one particularly difficult session, people reveal their true character when you need them most. Your job loss didn't change who you are, Almeida. It revealed who they are. Instead of wallowing in self-pity, I channeled my pain into fierce determination. If my family had written me off as a failure, I'd prove them wrong through sheer willpower and hard work. I took 3 part-time jobs simultaneously. My morning shift started at 5:30 at Brew Haven, a local coffee shop in the Highland neighborhood, where I learned to operate industrial espresso machines and memorize complicated drink orders. The pace was relentless, but the regular customers began to know my name, and their friendly greetings became the highlight of my days. Afternoons, I worked data entry for Mountain States Medical Billing, a company that processed insurance claims for doctors' offices across Colorado. The work was mind-numbing, but it required precision and attention to detail. I took pride in my accuracy rates and rarely made errors. Weekends, I walked dogs through Paw Steps, an app that connected pet owners with reliable caregivers. Colorado winters meant trudging through snow with energetic golden retrievers and stubborn bulldogs. But being outdoors with animals provided a therapeutic counterbalance to my indoor jobs. My daily routine became a survival marathon. I'd wake at 4:30, shower quickly, and grab coffee and a granola bar before my first shift. During lunch breaks at the medical billing office, I'd catch up on Paw Steps scheduling and answer messages from dog owners. Evenings were spent walking pets until darkness fell, then returning to my studio to collapse into bed. Every dollar went into a coffee tin I kept hidden in my freezer, buried behind frozen vegetables I bought on clearance. My hands developed permanent cracks from constant hand-washing between jobs. My feet ached from standing on concrete floors and walking miles through city neighborhoods. But my resolve grew stronger with each paycheck, each small victory. Each night I went to bed, knowing I'd survived another day without my family's help. That confidence was shattered completely on a Thursday evening in March. I was shopping for groceries at the King Soopers on Federal Boulevard, comparing prices between generic and name-brand pasta sauce, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Almeida, oh my goodness, I almost didn't recognize you." I turned to see my cousin, Lisa, my aunt's daughter, who worked in human resources for Davidson Electronics, one of Denver's largest employers. Lisa had always been friendly at family gatherings, though we'd never been particularly close. Her expression now was uncomfortable, like someone who'd accidentally walked into the wrong room. "Lisa, hi!" I managed, suddenly self-conscious about my thrift store clothes and exhausted appearance. "How are you doing? I heard about Brighton Creative. That's rough." Her voice carried genuine sympathy, which made what happened next even more devastating. "I'm managing," I said, "actually looking for something more permanent in marketing if you hear of anything." Lisa's face changed completely. She glanced around nervously as if checking for surveillance cameras. "Oh, Almeida, She trailed off, looking genuinely distressed. "I shouldn't say this, but you should know. Your mom has been calling companies. She's been telling HR departments that you're unreliable, that you have mental health issues that make you unsuitable for employment." The grocery store noise faded to white static. Shopping carts and customer conversations became distant background hum as Lisa's words processed in my brain. "She called Davidson 2 weeks ago when your resume came through our system." Lisa continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She said you'd been let go for attendance problems and that hiring you would be a mistake for any responsible employer." I felt my knees weaken. The pasta sauce jar slipped from my hands and shattered on the linoleum floor, spreading marinara across my shoes. "I'm so sorry," Lisa said quickly. I shouldn't have said anything. I have to go. She abandoned her shopping cart and hurried toward the exit, leaving me standing in a puddle of tomato sauce and shattered glass. A store employee appeared with a mop and dustpan asking if I was all right. I mumbled an apology and fled the store, driving home in a daze while the full implications of Lisa's revelation settled over me like a crushing weight. My family hadn't just abandoned me. They'd been actively sabotaging my recovery, ensuring I'd remain isolated and struggling. Every rejection letter, every unanswered application, every closed door had been orchestrated by the woman who'd given birth to me. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat on my futon, staring at the wall, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach repeatedly. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it redefined my understanding of cruelty. Dr. Morris's office became my sanctuary the following week. I sat in her familiar chair surrounded by plants and calming artwork and told her everything about the grocery store encounter. My voice broke several times as I described Lisa's revelations about Carol's phone calls. I always wondered why I wasn't getting callbacks, I said, tissue crumpled in my hands. I thought it was just the economy, just bad luck, but she's been destroying my chances deliberately. Dr. Morris leaned forward, her expression serious. Almeda, what your mother did is a form of psychological warfare. It's designed to keep you dependent and vulnerable. The question now is how you're going to respond. The breakdown that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced. I sobbed until my throat was raw, grieving not just for the lost job opportunities, but for the family I'd thought I had. The mother I'd believed loved me unconditionally had been working systematically to ensure my failure. But from that devastation emerged something unexpected clarity. I'm done trying to win them back, I told Dr. Morris. I'm done hoping they'll change. If they want to see me fail, I'll succeed so spectacularly that they'll choke on their own bitterness. My work schedule intensified beyond what most people would consider sustainable. I woke at 4:15 instead of 4:30, giving myself extra time to review property management materials I'd started studying. During coffee shop slow periods, I read real estate law textbooks I'd checked out from the public library. My lunch breaks at the medical billing office became study sessions focused on accounting principles and tenant relations. The physical toll was severe. My clothes hung loosely on my shrinking frame because I often forgot to eat proper meals. Dark circles under my eyes became permanent fixtures. My hands, already cracked from constant washing, developed calluses from gripping textbooks and writing notes during every spare moment. But my mental resilience grew stronger daily. Each morning brought fresh determination to prove my family wrong. Every exhausted evening reinforced my commitment to building something they couldn't touch or destroy. The breakthrough came through Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, an 83-year-old widow whose golden retriever Buster walked every Saturday morning. Eleanor lived in a beautifully maintained Victorian house in the Highlands neighborhood, filled with antique furniture and family photographs spanning decades. Initially, our interactions were purely professional. I'd arrive at 8:30, walk Buster for 45 minutes through the neighborhood's tree-lined streets, and return him safely home. Eleanor always had my payment ready in a sealed envelope along with bottled water and homemade cookies. Gradually, our exchanges became longer. Eleanor would ask about my week, and I'd inquire about her garden or Buster's latest adventures. She had a sharp wit and keen intelligence that made conversations engaging rather than obligatory. One Saturday in April, Eleanor invited me inside for coffee after Buster's walk. Her living room was elegant but comfortable with Persian rugs and built-in bookshelves that reached the ceiling. "You're studying something," she observed, noticing the property management textbook sticking out of my backpack. "What's your goal?" I explained my interest in real estate and property management, expecting polite encouragement. Instead, Eleanor's eyes lit up with genuine interest. I owned a real estate development company for 37 years, she said, built shopping centers and apartment complexes across the Front Range. Sold the business when my husband died, but I still own several rental properties. She described her current situation: 3 rental properties that required constant attention, tenant issues she no longer had energy to handle, and maintenance problems that overwhelmed her. Her previous property management company had proven unreliable and expensive. If you're serious about learning this business, Eleanor said, I'd be willing to pay for your certification program in exchange for managing my properties. Consider it an investment in both our futures. The opportunity felt too good to be true, but Eleanor's offer was genuine. She drove me to the Colorado Association of Realtors office the following Monday and wrote a check for my property management certification course. The next 4 months became a masterclass in real estate, taught by one of Denver's most successful former developers. Eleanor had kept every contract, every legal document, every lesson learned from decades in the business. She taught me how to screen tenants, properly handle maintenance requests efficiently, and navigate landlord-tenant law. I studied with obsessive dedication. My studio apartment transformed into a temporary classroom with legal textbooks stacked on every surface, sample contracts taped to walls, and spreadsheets covering my kitchen table. I practiced rent calculations, learned about security deposit regulations, and memorized fair housing laws. The certification exam required comprehensive knowledge of real estate principles, property law, financial management, and tenant relations. I took practice tests until I could complete them, perfectly reviewed case studies, until I understood every nuance and prepared for scenarios I hoped never to encounter. During this intensive study period, my old life began feeling like a distant memory. The coffee shop shifts, medical billing work, and dog walking continued, but they became means to an end rather than survival necessities. Every paycheck went into my freezer savings, building the foundation for whatever came next. The unexpected call came on a Tuesday evening in August. My phone displayed Janet's number, something I hadn't seen in over 8 months. My initial instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity won. Janet's voice was completely different from our last conversation. Instead of lectures about personal responsibility, she was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. "Almeda, please, I need your help," she gasped between tears. "Derek's been arrested. They're saying he stole money from his company's pension fund. We need $20,000 for bail and legal fees." The irony was staggering. The family that had abandoned me for being unemployed was now begging for money to save Derek from criminal charges. "I don't have $20,000, Janet," I said calmly. "You have to have something saved up," she insisted, her desperation palpable. "You've been working multiple jobs for months, and we're Family Almeda. Family helps family." The phrase, "family helps family," from the sister who'd blocked me on social media and refused my calls for months, might have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. "Where was family when I needed help?" I asked. "This is different." Janet snapped, her true personality emerging through the tears. "Derek made a mistake, but losing his job was about the economy. He's not a failure like—" She caught herself before completing the sentence. "Like me," I finished. "Is that what you were about to say?" "You're being selfish and heartless," Janet screamed. "We raised you better than this. When Derek gets out, he's going to remember who abandoned family in their time of need." She hung up before I could respond, leaving me holding a silent phone in my quiet apartment. But instead of the crushing pain I'd expected, I felt something entirely different: relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could see my family's true nature with perfect clarity. They hadn't abandoned me because I'd failed or done something wrong. They'd abandoned me because I'd become inconvenient, someone whose struggles reflected poorly on their self-image. Now they needed me, and they expected me to forget months of silence and cruelty because blood relations supposedly created automatic obligations. I sat on my futon that night, looking around my modest studio apartment that I'd maintained through my own efforts, and realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was grateful. Their rejection had forced me to become stronger, more self-reliant, and more discerning about relationships. My phone didn't ring again that week. The silence spoke volumes about their priorities and expectations. Eleanor Fitzgerald and I celebrated my certification results together at her kitchen table, sharing champagne and homemade apple pie, while Buster dozed contentedly at our feet. I'd passed with a 94% score, placing me in the top 10% of test takers statewide. "Now the real education begins," Eleanor said, raising her glass. "Managing properties isn't just about collecting rent Almeida. It's about creating homes where people want to live and building relationships that benefit everyone involved." She handed me keys to her 3 rental properties, a duplex near the University of Denver, a small apartment building in Capitol Hill, and a single-family house in Lakewood. Each property had its own personality challenges and tenant dynamics that I needed to understand. The duplex housed graduate students who kept irregular hours and occasionally forgot rent due dates, but maintained the property meticulously. The apartment building contained a mix of young professionals and retirees who valued quiet and reliability above everything else. The Lakewood house was home to a family with 2 children who needed responsive maintenance service and clear communication about any disruptions. I quit my coffee shop and medical billing jobs to focus entirely on property management. For the first time in over a year, I had a single profession, rather than a survival patchwork of part-time work. My approach emphasized personal attention and proactive problem-solving. Instead of waiting for tenants to report issues, I conducted monthly walkthroughs to identify potential problems before they became expensive repairs. I established relationships with reliable contractors, created detailed maintenance schedules, and implemented digital systems for rent collection and communication. The results were immediate and impressive. Tenant turnover dropped to nearly 0. Maintenance costs decreased because problems were addressed early. Most importantly, rental income increased as Eleanor and I upgraded properties strategically and attracted higher quality tenants willing to pay premium rates for superior service. Eleanor introduced me to her network of former business associates who'd remained in real estate investment. These weren't typical landlords seeking maximum profit with minimal effort. They were sophisticated investors who understood that quality property management increased long-term returns and reduced headaches. My first outside client was Margaret Chen, Eleanor's former business partner, who owned 4 rental properties scattered across Denver's suburbs. Margaret had been frustrated with large property management companies that treated her holdings as minor accounts unworthy of personal attention. "Eleanor says you understand that good tenants are worth keeping," Margaret said during our initial meeting. "Show me how you'd handle my properties differently." I presented a comprehensive management plan that included tenant retention strategies, preventive maintenance protocols, and market analysis for optimal rent pricing. Margaret was impressed enough to hire me immediately, increasing my management portfolio to 7 properties. Word spread quickly through Eleanor's network. Within 6 months, I was managing 12 properties for 5 different owners. Each new client brought unique challenges and learning opportunities that expanded my expertise rapidly. I moved from my studio apartment to a modest 1-bedroom in a safer neighborhood near downtown. The additional space felt luxurious after months of living surrounded by stacked textbooks and makeshift office supplies. I bought my first new furniture since college, a proper desk, comfortable office chair, and filing cabinets for organizing client documents. My personal life began expanding beyond work for the first time since the layoff. I attended networking events for young professionals, joined a hiking club that explored Colorado's mountain trails on weekends, and started taking Spanish classes at the community college. The friendships that developed felt different from relationships I'd had before my family crisis. Sarah Beth Watson, a mortgage broker I met at a real estate investors meeting, became genuinely close friend who understood the challenges of building a business from nothing. Marcus Rivera, a contractor who'd become my go-to person for maintenance issues, shared my appreciation for quality work and honest dealing. Most surprisingly, I began dating Thomas Hendricks, a veterinarian I'd met during my dog walking days. He'd always been friendly when I brought clients' pets for checkups, but our relationship deepened after I stopped walking dogs professionally and started visiting his clinic as a regular customer with my own newly adopted cat, Luna. Thomas was everything my family wasn't supportive during difficult times, genuinely interested in my success and capable of seeing challenges as temporary setbacks rather than character flaws. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on shared values and mutual respect rather than convenience or obligation. The breakthrough that changed everything came through Eleanor's most significant gesture of faith in my abilities. On a crisp October morning, she invited me to lunch at her favorite downtown restaurant and presented an offer that left me speechless. "I want to sell you one of my properties," she said simply, "the duplex near the university, below market value with owner financing to make it affordable for you." The numbers she proposed were incredibly generous. The duplex was worth approximately $350,000 based on recent comparable sales, but Eleanor offered to sell it to me for $275,000 with a low down payment and favorable interest rates. "Why would you do this?" I asked, overwhelmed by her generosity. Eleanor smiled. "Because I'm 83 years old with no children and more money than I'll ever spend. Because you've proven yourself trustworthy and capable. And because sometimes successful people have an obligation to create opportunities for the next generation." The loan application process was complex but manageable. My 18 months of steady property management income combined with Eleanor's willingness to finance the majority of the purchase price made the deal feasible, despite my unconventional employment history. Closing day felt surreal. I signed dozens of documents, transferred money I'd saved dollar by dollar from 3 part-time jobs, and received keys to my first piece of real estate. At 25 years old, I owned rental property in one of Denver's most desirable neighborhoods. The duplex immediately generated positive cash flow after expenses. More importantly, it represented tangible proof that I'd built something substantial from absolutely nothing. My family's abandonment hadn't destroyed me. It had forced me to become stronger and more resourceful than I'd ever imagined possible. The validation was sweet, but it came with an unexpected complication. 3 days after I closed on the duplex, Carol appeared at my property management office. I was reviewing maintenance requests when she walked through the door without knocking, looking around my professional space with obvious surprise. She'd aged noticeably in the 3 years since our last contact. Gray streaked her brown hairlines, creased her face more deeply, and her posture suggested someone carrying heavy burdens. "Almeda," she said, her voice uncertain, "I heard you bought a house." News traveled quickly through Denver's interconnected communities. Someone from Eleanor's social circle must have mentioned the purchase to someone else, eventually reaching people who knew our family. "I bought a duplex," I corrected, keeping my tone neutral. "It's an investment property." Carol sat down across from my desk without being invited, her eyes scanning the client files, professional certificates, and business equipment that filled my office. "I owe you an apology," she said finally. "Things have been difficult since Derek's arrest. We've lost our house, and Janet's struggling to keep her restaurant job. I realize I may have been too harsh when you were going through your unemployment situation." The casual phrasing, "your unemployment situation," revealed how little she understood about the pain she'd caused. In her mind, my crisis had been a temporary inconvenience rather than a life-altering abandonment by the people I'd trusted most. "Oh, we're family Almeda," she continued. "I know there were misunderstandings, but family is supposed to stick together. Derek's legal troubles have been expensive, and we could really use your help with a co-signature on a loan to help us get back on our feet." The request was breathtakingly presumptuous. After 3 years of silence and deliberate sabotage, she expected me to risk my newly established financial stability to rescue them from consequences of Derek's criminal behavior. "I can't co-sign loans, Mom," I said gently but firmly. "My business requires maintaining good credit, and co-signing creates liabilities I can't afford." Her expression shifted immediately from hopeful to angry. "You can afford to buy houses, but you can't help your own family. I raised you better than this, Almeda. Success doesn't give you the right to abandon the people who supported you." The revisionist history was stunning. In her memory, they'd apparently supported me through my struggles rather than actively undermining my recovery attempts. "Where was this family support when I needed it?" I asked. This is different," Carol snapped. "Derek's situation isn't his fault. The economy forced him into desperate choices. He's not a failure who couldn't keep a simple job." There it was, the truth beneath her apology. Derek's criminal behavior was understandable and forgivable because it resulted from external circumstances. My unemployment had been a personal failing that reflected poor character and questionable life choices. "I think you should leave," I said calmly. Carol stood slowly, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You'll regret this, Almeda. When you need family someday, you'll remember who abandoned who. Derek and Janet won't forget how you treated us when we needed help." She walked out of my office and slammed the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I sat in the sudden silence, recognizing that nothing had fundamentally changed. My family still saw me as the same desperate young woman they'd rejected 3 years earlier, someone whose success was temporary and whose independence was somehow offensive to their sensibilities. But I wasn't the same person anymore. Their opinion of me no longer had the power to cause sleepless nights or anxiety attacks. I'd built something real and substantial that didn't depend on their approval or support. That evening, I called Thomas and told him about Carol's visit. His response was characteristically supportive and insightful. "She's probably threatened by your success," he said. "It proves that their treatment of you was wrong, and admitting that would require confronting some uncomfortable truths about themselves." I realized he was right. My independence and success made their abandonment look cruel and unjustified rather than reasonable and protective. As long as I'd remained struggling and isolated, they could maintain the narrative that I deserved my circumstances. Now I'd proven that narrative false, and they couldn't handle the cognitive dissonance. 2 years transformed my life completely. Reliable Residences, the property management company I'd officially incorporated, managed 47 properties across 3 Denver neighborhoods. My client base included successful professionals, retirees, and small-scale investors who valued personal attention and transparent communication over corporate efficiency. The duplex purchase had been followed by 2 additional investment properties, a single-family house in an up-and-coming neighborhood, and a small apartment building that required renovation but offered excellent long-term potential. The rental income from these properties, combined with my management fees, provided financial security I'd never imagined possible. My relationship with Thomas had deepened into something I'd never experienced before, a partnership built on mutual support, shared goals, and genuine affection. He proposed on a hiking trail in Rocky Mountain National Park, choosing a spot overlooking the valley, where we'd had our first serious conversation about future dreams. Planning our wedding became a joyful counterpoint to the intensity of growing my business. We'd chosen a small ceremony for the following spring at a historic mansion in downtown Denver, with a guest list that reflected our chosen family rather than biological obligations. Eleanor, now 85 but still sharp and engaged, would serve as my matron of honor. Sarah, Beth, and Marcus had become integral parts of our support system. Dr. Morris, who'd helped me navigate the darkest period of my life, would attend as an honored guest. My great aunt Ruby, who'd reached out independently after learning about my family's treatment, brought warmth and wisdom that reminded me healthy family relationships were possible. The Craftsman house I'd purchased 2 years earlier had appreciated significantly due to neighborhood gentrification. Property values in my area had increased by 38% as young professionals discovered the charm of tree-lined streets and historic architecture within easy commuting distance of downtown. Life felt stable and promising in ways I'd never taken for granted since my family crisis. I woke each morning excited about work challenges and personal growth opportunities. The anxiety attacks and insomnia that had plagued me during my unemployment were distant memories. That sense of security made the subtle warning signs easy to dismiss initially. The first strange occurrence happened on a Tuesday morning in September. I was collecting mail from the box outside my office when I noticed the letters weren't quite aligned properly. Someone had been through my mail searching for specific items or information, then tried to replace everything exactly as they'd found it. I mentioned it to Sarah Beth during our weekly coffee meeting, but we both attributed it to a postal worker or someone making an innocent mistake. The second incident was more concerning. My neighbor, Mrs. Georgia Patterson, an elderly woman who spent most of her time gardening and observing neighborhood activities, stopped me outside my house on a Saturday afternoon. "Those insurance people came by again yesterday," she said, referring to people she'd apparently seen before. "Taking more pictures of your house for their records. Seems like a lot of documentation for a simple policy update." I hadn't requested any insurance inspections or updates. My homeowner's policy was current and required no additional documentation. "What did they look like?" I asked. Mrs. Patterson described a woman in her 30s with shoulder-length brown hair driving a silver sedan accompanied by a man who took photographs of my house from multiple angles. She'd assumed they were legitimate because they carried clipboards and looked professional. The description didn't match anyone from my insurance company, which concerned me enough to call my agent. He confirmed that no inspections had been scheduled and no additional documentation was needed for my policy. "Someone's probably casing houses for break-ins," he suggested. "You should report it to the police and maybe consider upgrading your security system." The suggestion made sense, but something about the situation felt more personal than random criminal activity. The third warning sign came through my business. A locksmith called my office Thursday afternoon to confirm an appointment I'd never scheduled. "This is Metro Lock Services," the caller said. "We're confirming your 2 o'clock appointment tomorrow for lock replacement at your residence on Maple Street." "I didn't schedule any lock replacement," I said. "Are you sure the appointment was made this morning by someone claiming to be the homeowner? They provided your address and said it was urgent." Someone had tried to gain access to my house by impersonating me with a locksmith. The attempt was amateur and easily detected, but it suggested coordinated planning rather than opportunistic crime. I reported the incident to Denver police, who took a report, but explained that no actual crime had occurred since the locksmith had called to confirm rather than simply showing up. "Change your locks anyway," the officer advised, "and be careful about who has access to your personal information." The advice was sound, but I was beginning to suspect this wasn't about random criminals or identity theft. The timing, the targeting of my specific property, and the amateur execution suggested someone who knew me personally but lacked experience with actual criminal activity. My suspicions crystallized when I discovered the source of the leak in my defenses. Sandra Martinez, my cleaning lady for the past 18 months, had always been reliable and trustworthy. She arrived every other Wednesday, cleaned my house thoroughly, and left everything exactly as I preferred. We developed a comfortable working relationship built on mutual respect and clear communication. But Sandra's behavior had changed recently. She seemed nervous during her last few visits, avoiding eye contact and finishing her work more quickly than usual. When I tried to make conversation, her responses were brief and distracted. The truth emerged accidentally during a conversation with Thomas at his veterinary clinic. He mentioned seeing Sandra having an intense discussion with a woman in the parking lot of Romano's Italian restaurant, where Janet worked as a manager. It looked like they knew each other well, Thomas said. The other woman was doing most of the talking, and Sandra seemed upset about something. The connection was too specific to be coincidental. I asked Thomas to describe the woman he'd seen with Sandra. Shoulder-length brown hair, probably in her 30s, driving a silver sedan, he said. She was dressed like she'd come from work at a restaurant or something. The description matched both Janet and Mrs. Patterson's account of the woman taking photographs of my house. That evening, I called Sandra and asked her to come in early for our next appointment. I explained that I needed to discuss some changes to our arrangement. Sandra arrived the following morning looking visibly distressed. She cleaned nervously for about an hour before I asked her to sit down for our conversation. "Sandra, I need to ask you something directly," I said. "Has someone been asking you questions about me or my house?" Her composure crumbled immediately. She started crying and apologizing in rapid Spanish mixed with English. "I'm so sorry, Miss Almeida," she sobbed. "I never meant for anything bad to happen. Janet said she was your sister and just wanted to surprise you with something nice. She offered me $500 to make copies of your keys and tell her about your schedule." The betrayal was staggering, but Sandra's distress was genuine. She explained that Janet had approached her at the restaurant where Sandra's daughter worked as a server. Janet had claimed to be planning a surprise family reconciliation and needed access to my house to set up decorations. "She said you'd been estranged from family and she wanted to make things right," Sandra said. "But then she started asking strange questions about your business and your money. I got scared and tried to back out, but she said I'd already taken her money and had to follow through." Sandra reached into her purse and pulled out a set of keys I recognized as copies of my house keys. "I never used them, Miss Almeida. I was supposed to let them into your house this weekend when you're out of town, but I can't do it. Something feels wrong about the whole thing." The weekend she referenced was Thomas's veterinary conference in Colorado Springs, where I was supposed to accompany him for 3 days. Janet apparently had detailed knowledge of my travel plans and had been preparing to access my house during my absence. "What were they planning to do in my house?" I asked. Janet said they just needed to look around and gather some family photographs and documents that belonged to them, Sandra said. But she brought moving boxes when she met with me yesterday. Lots of moving boxes. The scope of their plan was becoming clear, and it was far more serious than simple burglary or harassment. I thanked Sandra for her honesty and assured her that she wouldn't face any legal consequences for cooperating with me now. She returned the copied keys and promised to have no further contact with Janet. That afternoon, I called my attorney, Patricia Williamson, whom I'd worked with on real estate transactions and business incorporation. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in property law and had experience dealing with family disputes over inheritance and asset ownership. "This sounds like more than harassment," Patricia said after hearing the full story. "If they're planning to move into your house with boxes, they're probably going to claim some kind of ownership or squatter's rights. We need to document everything and be prepared for whatever they're planning." She advised changing my locks immediately and installing a security system with cameras. More importantly, she suggested setting a trap. "Instead of confronting them or changing your travel plans, let them proceed with their plan while we document everything," Patricia said. "If they're going to commit crimes, let's make sure we have irrefutable evidence for prosecution." The strategy felt dangerous, but Patricia assured me that we'd have backup support and legal protection throughout the process. "Your family clearly doesn't understand that you're not the same vulnerable person they abandoned 5 years ago," she said. "It's time to teach them that lesson definitively." As we planned our counteroffensive, I realized that part of me had been expecting this confrontation eventually. My success had been too visible, my independence too complete for them to ignore indefinitely. The only surprise was how amateur and poorly planned their approach had been. They'd underestimated both my resources and my resolve assumptions that were about to cost them dearly. But first, I had to deal with an unexpected emotional blow that threatened to destabilize everything I'd built. The call came at 6:30 Friday morning. Eleanor's neighbor found her peacefully in her garden, apparently having passed away during the night while tending to her roses. Buster had remained beside her until morning when his unusual behavior alerted the neighbor that something was wrong. The funeral was small but meaningful, attended by Eleanor's former business associates, longtime friends, and the extended community of people whose lives she'd touched through her generosity and wisdom. I spoke about her mentorship and the opportunities she'd created, struggling to maintain composure while describing how profoundly she'd influenced my life. Eleanor's estate attorney, Richard Banks, contacted me the following week with news that left me stunned. Eleanor had updated her will 6 months earlier, leaving me a substantial inheritance, including her remaining rental properties and a significant cash bequest. She was very specific about her reasoning, Mr. Banks explained. She believed you represented the values and integrity she'd tried to instill in the real estate industry. She wanted to ensure you had the resources to continue growing your business and helping others the way she helped you. The inheritance transformed my financial situation completely, but it also came with increased responsibility for maintaining Eleanor's legacy and living up to her faith in my character. More immediately, it meant that my family's plan to take over my house was now targeting someone with significantly more resources and legal protection than they'd anticipated. Their timing couldn't have been worse from their perspective, but it was perfect for mine. As I prepared to leave for Thomas's veterinary conference, knowing that my family planned to invade my home during my absence, I felt a strange combination of grief for Eleanor's loss and anticipation for the justice that was finally coming. They'd underestimated me 5 years ago when they thought unemployment made me worthless. They were about to make the same mistake again. Patricia Williamson and I spent Thursday evening preparing for what we expected to happen over the weekend. She'd arranged for a private investigator named Robert Chen, a former police detective who specialized in domestic disputes and property crimes, to surveil my house from a concealed position across the street. We installed additional security cameras in locations that wouldn't be immediately visible to intruders, including a hidden camera in my kitchen that would capture conversations and activities in the main living area. Everything was designed to document whatever my family planned to do. The key is letting them incriminate themselves completely before we intervene, Patricia explained. If they're planning to claim ownership of your property, we need video evidence of them acknowledging that it's fraudulent. Thomas and I made a show of packing for our trip to Colorado Springs, loading suitcases into his truck where neighbors could see our departure preparations. We discussed our travel plans loudly enough for anyone watching to confirm that we'd be gone from Friday evening through Monday morning. Instead of actually leaving town, we checked into a hotel near downtown Denver, close enough to respond quickly if needed, but far enough away to avoid accidentally compromising the surveillance operation. Friday night passed quietly. Robert Chen reported normal neighborhood activity with no signs of unusual interest in my property. Saturday morning brought the first signs of activity. At approximately 10:30, a silver sedan drove slowly past my house 3 times before parking 2 blocks away. Robert confirmed that the driver matched Thomas's description of the woman he'd seen with Sandra at the restaurant. Subject appears to be conducting surveillance of the target property, Robert reported via text message, waiting for additional participants before approaching. The waiting was excruciating. Thomas and I sat in our hotel room monitoring text updates from Robert and trying to maintain normal conversation while my family prepared to violate my home and potentially steal everything I'd worked to build. At 12:45, a moving truck arrived at my house. This is really happening, I said to Thomas, feeling my heart race as the reality of the situation hit me. The truck was followed by a second vehicle carrying Derek, whom I recognized despite not having seen him in over 5 years. He looked older and leaner, probably due to his time in jail, but moved with the same arrogant confidence that had characterized his personality since childhood. Carol emerged from the passenger seat of Derek's car, directing the moving crew with the same authoritative manner she'd always used when organizing family events. Janet appeared from the silver sedan, carrying a clipboard and what appeared to be official-looking documents. "Multiple subjects now on scene," Robert texted. "Subjects are directing moving personnel to remove items from truck and carry them into target property, using keys to access front door." The violation felt visceral despite my preparation for it. These people were walking into my home uninvited, using keys they'd obtained through deception and fraud, and treating my property like it belonged to them. But the most shocking aspect was the scale of their operation. "Thomas, they're not just breaking in," I said, watching Robert's photo updates on my phone. "They're moving in permanently." The moving truck contained furniture, appliances, personal belongings, and enough household items to suggest they planned to live in my house long-term, rather than simply stealing valuables or conducting a quick search. Derek was directing movers to set up a bedroom in my living room using furniture I didn't recognize. Janet was hanging family photographs on my walls, including pictures that featured all of them, but notably excluded me. Carol had taken over my kitchen and was cooking what appeared to be a full meal on my stove. The scene was surreal. My family was transforming my house into their house, erasing evidence of my presence and replacing it with their own belongings and memories. They're not treating this like theft, I realized. They're treating it like they're coming home to property that rightfully belongs to them. At 2:15, I couldn't watch from a distance anymore. Patricia had advised waiting until they'd incriminated themselves more thoroughly, but seeing them desecrate Eleanor's memory and my hard-earned success was unbearable. "I'm going to my house," I told Thomas. "Are you sure that's wise?" he asked. "I need to look them in the eye," I said. "I need them to see that I'm not the same person they abandoned." Thomas insisted on accompanying me, and Robert Chen repositioned himself to continue documenting everything that followed. I used my own keys to enter my house through the front door, feeling like an intruder in my own home due to the transformation they'd created. The living room contained furniture I'd never seen before, arranged around boxes of personal items that belonged to people who had no legal right to be there. Carol was standing at my stove, stirring something in a pot that belonged to her rather than me. She looked up when I entered the kitchen, showing no surprise or embarrassment at being caught in the act of illegally occupying my property. "Almida," she said calmly, as if my appearance was expected and welcome. "We were hoping you'd get here soon. We have some things to discuss." The casual tone was more infuriating than screaming or accusations would have been. She was acting like my arrival was a planned family meeting rather than the interruption of a crime in progress. Janet emerged from the hallway carrying a box of photographs and decorative items. She smiled at me with the same condescending expression she'd used during our childhood when explaining why I was wrong about something. "We need to talk about some misunderstandings," Janet said. "There have been some mistakes about property ownership that need to be corrected." Derek appeared from my bedroom where he'd apparently been setting up furniture or personal belongings. He was larger than I remembered, probably due to weightlifting during his incarceration, and carried himself with the aggressive confidence of someone accustomed to intimidating others. "Almida Good," he said. "We've been trying to reach you about some family business that can't wait any longer." The three of them positioned themselves around my kitchen in a way that felt deliberately threatening, blocking potential exit routes and creating a sense of being surrounded in my own home. "This is my house," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. "You need to leave immediately." Carol's expression shifted to the patronizing patience she'd always used when explaining reality to children who didn't understand adult situations. Sweetheart, there have been some legal complications about how you acquired this property, she said. The money you used came from family sources, which create certain ownership obligations that weren't properly documented. She pulled out a folder containing official-looking documents that I recognized as the fraudulent legal papers Sandra had mentioned. These documents show that the down payment for this house came from family funds that were intended as a loan rather than a gift, Carol continued. Since you failed to repay those funds, ownership reverts to the family members who provided the financial assistance. The creativity of their fraud was impressive, if completely fictional. They'd created fake documents claiming they'd provided money for my house purchase when the actual funds had come from my own savings and Eleanor's generous financing arrangement. You didn't provide any money for this house, I said. That's not what these legal documents indicate, Janet said, producing additional papers from her clipboard. We also have evidence that you used family connections and resources to build your business unfairly, which creates additional obligations. Derek stepped closer, using his physical presence to intimidate me. The simple reality is that you benefited from family support, whether you acknowledge it or not. This house and your business success belong to family, not just you. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated, despite its obvious fraudulence. They were rewriting history to make themselves the source of my success, thereby justifying their claim to the benefits of that success. Where was this family support when I was unemployed and homeless? I asked. You were never homeless, Carol said dismissively. You had a perfectly adequate apartment that you chose to leave. And your unemployment was temporary, just like Derek's legal situation is temporary. The revisionist history was breathtaking in its completeness. In their version, my family crisis had been a minor misunderstanding rather than systematic abandonment, and Derek's felony convictions were temporary setbacks rather than criminal behavior. The bottom line is simple, Derek said, moving even closer to intimidate me further. You don't have a real family anymore, Almeda. We're taking what should have been ours from the beginning, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. Janet nodded in agreement. We've already moved in, changed the utilities to our names, and filed the appropriate legal documents. This is our house now, and you need to accept that reality. The moment Janet finished speaking, I realized they'd made the crucial mistake Patricia and I had been waiting for. They'd admitted on camera that their claims were fraudulent, that they knew I had no family support during my crisis, and that they were taking my property through deception rather than legitimate legal process. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 while maintaining eye contact with my mother. I'm calling the police to report a break-in and attempted theft of my property, I said calmly. You can't call the police on your own family, Carol said, but her confidence was beginning to waver. Watch me, I replied. The 911 operator answered quickly, and I explained that multiple people had illegally entered my home, were attempting to steal my property, and were currently refusing to leave despite being asked to do so. We'll have officers there within 10 minutes, the operator assured me. Derek grabbed my arm, trying to take my phone. You're making a huge mistake, Almeda. When they see our legal documents, you're going to be the one getting arrested. I jerked my arm away and stepped back toward the door. We'll see about that. The confidence they displayed throughout their invasion was beginning to crack as the reality of legal consequences became immediate rather than theoretical. But I wasn't done with them yet. As we waited for police to arrive, I noticed something that made my blood run cold and my resolve strengthen even further. Derek was wearing a ring I recognized immediately. Eleanor's late husband's wedding band, a distinctive gold band with an engraved pattern that she'd kept in her jewelry box as a cherished memento. Where did you get that ring? I asked. Derek glanced down at his hand, momentarily confused by the question. It's been in our family for years, he said. Why? The lie was so blatant that it confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. Their crimes weren't limited to targeting me. They'd been robbing elderly people, possibly including Eleanor before her death. Looking around my house more carefully, I began noticing other items mixed among their belongings that didn't belong to them. A silver picture frame I recognized from Eleanor's mantel, a distinctive ceramic vase that had belonged to one of her friends, and several pieces of antique jewelry that I'd seen Eleanor wear on special occasions. My family weren't just thieves targeting my property, they were predators who'd been systematically robbing elderly victims, and Eleanor had been one of their targets. The scope of their crimes was far beyond simple sibling rivalry or family disputes. They'd crossed a line that would destroy them completely. The Denver police arrived in 2 patrol cars with sirens that announced their presence to the entire neighborhood. Officers Martinez and Thompson approached my front door while Officers Chen and Williams positioned themselves at potential exit points to prevent anyone from fleeing. I met the officers at my door with my driver's license, property deed, and mortgage documents, ready to establish my legal ownership of the house. Behind me, my family had gathered in the living room, suddenly looking far less confident than they had moments earlier. Ma'am, you reported a break-in in progress, Officer Martinez asked. Yes, I said. These people entered my house illegally, using copied keys, moved their belongings into my property, and are refusing to leave despite being told they're not welcome. Officer Thompson asked to see identification from everyone present and requested documentation of their claimed ownership rights. Carol produced the fraudulent legal papers with obvious nervousness, while Derek and Janet stood behind her, looking increasingly uncomfortable. The officers examined the fake documents, quickly comparing them to my legitimate property records. Officer Martinez asked several pointed questions about the supposed family loan and the legal process they claimed to have followed. These documents appear to have been created recently using computer software, Officer Martinez observed. The paper quality and printing style don't match legitimate legal filings from several years ago. Derek tried to maintain his aggressive demeanor. Those are legitimate family business documents. Just because they're recent doesn't mean the underlying claims aren't valid. See, sir, I need you to step back and remain calm, Officer Thompson warned. We're trying to determine what happened here. While the officers continued examining documents, I pointed out the stolen items I'd recognized among my family's belongings. That ring my brother is wearing belonged to Eleanor Fitzgerald, an elderly woman who died last month, I said. That picture frame and vase also belonged to her. I believe they've been stealing from elderly victims. Officer Chen examined Derek's ring more closely. Where did you acquire this ring, sir? It's been in our family for years, Derek repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. Ma'am, do you have any evidence that these items belong to the deceased woman you mentioned? Officer Martinez asked. I showed them photographs on my phone from Eleanor's house, clearly showing the distinctive ring on her mantel and the picture frame in her living room. I also provided contact information for her estate attorney, Richard Banks, who could verify which items were missing from her property. The officers radioed for backup and requested a detective to respond to investigate potential elder abuse and estate theft. They also called for additional units to secure the scene while they sorted through the complex criminal allegations. Janet attempted to salvage their plan by producing additional fake documents claiming they'd purchased the items legitimately from estate sales. We bought these items legally, she insisted. We have receipts. Ma'am, estate sales don't typically include items from houses where the owner died recently, Officer Thompson pointed out. These items wouldn't be available for public sale until after probate proceedings conclude. The web of lies was unraveling rapidly under professional scrutiny. Each explanation they offered created additional contradictions that highlighted the fraudulent nature of their entire operation. Detective Sarah Rodriguez arrived within 30 minutes and began conducting individual interviews to understand the full scope of the alleged crimes. She quickly identified inconsistencies in my family's stories and requested a warrant to search Derek's residence for additional stolen items. The private investigator Robert Chen provided video footage of the entire invasion, including audio recordings of their admissions that they were taking property they knew belonged to me. The evidence was comprehensive and incriminating beyond any reasonable doubt. This appears to be organized criminal activity targeting multiple victims, Detective Rodriguez concluded after reviewing the evidence. We'll need to coordinate with other jurisdictions to determine how many elderly people may have been victimized. Carol made one final desperate attempt to maintain control of the situation. "Almeida, please," she said, switching to a pleading tone. "We can work this out as a family. Don't let the police destroy what's left of our relationships." The emotional manipulation that had worked when I was 23 and vulnerable had no effect on the confident, successful woman I'd become. "You destroyed our relationship 5 years ago when you abandoned me," I replied. "You confirmed it today when you tried to steal everything I've built." Derek's anger finally exploded in a way that eliminated any sympathy officers might have had for their situation. "You ungrateful witch," he screamed. "We made you who you are and you're destroying your own family over some stupid house and jewelry. You'll regret this for the rest of your life." Officer Martinez immediately restrained Derek, who'd stepped aggressively toward me with clenched fists. "Sir, you're under arrest for threatening behavior and intimidation." The psychological dynamics that had controlled me during childhood and early adulthood were powerless against the legal system and professional law enforcement. Derek's intimidation tactics, Carol's emotional manipulation, and Janet's gaslighting looked exactly like what they were: criminal behavior designed to victimize vulnerable people. As they were placed in handcuffs and loaded into patrol cars, I felt no satisfaction or revenge, only a profound sense of justice finally being served. The moving truck contained stolen property from at least 6 different elderly victims, according to Detective Rodriguez's preliminary investigation. Items included jewelry, family heirlooms, financial documents, and small valuables that would be difficult to track, but valuable enough to provide significant income for people willing to exploit vulnerable seniors. "This appears to be a sophisticated operation," Detective Rodriguez explained. "They were using Derek's former position in pension fund management to identify elderly clients with significant assets, then using Carol's banking background to access financial information and Janet's restaurant job to gather personal details about potential victims. Eleanor had apparently been one of their later targets, which explained how Derek had acquired her husband's ring and other personal items. The timing of her death had prevented them from stealing more extensively, but they'd managed to take several valuable pieces before her estate was secured. The good news is that we can recover most of the stolen property and return it to the rightful owners or their estates," Detective Rodriguez said. "The bad news is that this level of organized elder abuse typically results in significant prison sentences." The investigation expanded rapidly as other law enforcement agencies became involved. Derek's parole was revoked immediately due to his new charges sending him back to prison while awaiting trial. Carol and Janet were released on bail but faced multiple felony charges related to fraud, theft, elder abuse, and conspiracy. Local news stations picked up the story as an example of elder abuse awareness, focusing on the sophisticated methods criminals use to target vulnerable seniors. My name was kept confidential in most coverage, but the story became a cautionary tale about trusting family members and protecting elderly relatives from financial exploitation. The validation was overwhelming. After 5 years of questioning whether my family's treatment had been justified by my own failures, I finally had objective confirmation that they were criminals who victimized innocent people for money. But the most meaningful vindication came from an unexpected source. Richard Banks. Eleanor's estate attorney called me 3 days after the arrests to discuss the criminal investigation and its impact on Eleanor's estate. "I need to tell you something about Eleanor's final months," he said. She'd been worried about some suspicious activity around her property and finances. She mentioned that people claiming to be family members of her tenants had been asking detailed questions about her assets and health status. Eleanor had apparently suspected that someone was gathering intelligence about her wealth and vulnerability, but hadn't realized the threat was coming from my family members. She changed her will specifically because she was concerned about people trying to exploit her estate. Mr. Banks explained, she wanted to ensure her assets went to someone with integrity who would use them responsibly rather than falling into the wrong hands. Eleanor's inheritance hadn't been only a reward for my character and hard work. It had been her final act of protection against the predators who'd been circling her property, waiting for an opportunity to steal everything she'd built over decades of honest business dealings. The irony was complete. By trying to destroy me, my family had ultimately enriched me far beyond what I could have achieved on my own, while simultaneously destroying themselves through their criminal behavior. Justice had been served in ways I never could have planned or imagined. 6 months after the arrests, I stood in the same kitchen where my family had tried to claim ownership of my life, but everything had changed. The criminal trials had concluded with convictions on all major charges. Derek received 7 years in federal prison for elder abuse and fraud. Carol was sentenced to 4 years in state prison for her role in the conspiracy. Janet received 3 years with the possibility of parole after 18 months. The local news coverage had been extensive, turning their crimes into a cautionary tale about protecting elderly community members from sophisticated financial predators. Detective Rodriguez used their case in training seminars to help other investigators recognize similar patterns of organized elder abuse. More importantly for me, the investigation had revealed the full scope of their crimes and vindicated my decision to cut them out of my life years earlier. They'd been targeting vulnerable people long before they came after me, using Derek's financial industry knowledge and Carol's banking background to identify victims systematically. The stolen property recovered from their operation was returned to victims' families or estates. Eleanor's items were returned to her estate, where they would be distributed according to her wishes. Several other families received closure about mysterious disappearances of family heirlooms and valuable items. My business had grown significantly in the aftermath of the criminal investigation. The publicity, while uncomfortable, initially had demonstrated my integrity and commitment to protecting clients' interests. Eleanor's inheritance had provided capital to expand into commercial property management, and I now oversaw over 60 properties throughout the Denver metropolitan area. More personally, Thomas and I had married in a beautiful ceremony at the historic mansion we'd originally chosen. The guest list reflected our chosen family. Sarah Beth served as my maid of honor. Marcus walked me down the aisle since Eleanor couldn't be there to fulfill that role, and Dr. Morris provided a blessing that acknowledged the journey I'd taken from isolation to belonging. My great-aunt Ruby had become a regular part of our lives, hosting monthly dinners, where we discussed family history and shared stories about building healthy relationships. Several cousins who'd reached out independently had become close friends, proving that biological family could coexist with chosen family when mutual respect and genuine affection were present. The foundation I'd established in Eleanor's memory was providing grants to help elderly people improve home security and avoid financial exploitation. We'd already assisted dozens of seniors in upgrading locks, installing security systems, and accessing legal services to protect their assets. On a rainy Thursday evening in March, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Derek had been released early for good behavior and cooperation with investigators tracking other elder abuse cases. He looked older and thinner than during the arrest, with gray showing in his hair and lines around his eyes that suggested serious reflection during his incarceration. "I know I have no right to be here," he said, standing in my office doorway, "but I wanted to apologize before I leave Denver permanently." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. curious about what he needed to say but prepared to call security if necessary. I spent a lot of time thinking about how we got to that point, Derek said. The truth is, we were jealous of your success and angry that you'd succeeded without us. It made our abandonment of you look cruel and unjustified. His honesty was surprising, though it didn't absolve him of the crimes he'd committed against elderly victims. We convinced ourselves that you owed us something because we were family, he continued, but family is supposed to support each other during difficult times, not punish people for needing help. Derek explained that his time in prison had included counseling and education programs that helped him understand the impact of his choices on victims. I know apologies don't undo damage, he said, but I wanted you to know that I understand what we did was wrong not just legally, but morally. You deserved better from us. The conversation was awkward but necessary for both of us. I explained that I'd forgiven them for my own peace of mind, but that forgiveness didn't eliminate consequences or obligations to their victims. I hope you find a way to rebuild your life honestly, I said, and I hope you use your experience to prevent other people from making the same mistakes. Derek nodded and stood to leave. For what it's worth, Eleanor would have been proud of how you handled everything. She always said you had more integrity than most people twice your age. After he left, I sat in my office thinking about the journey from that desperate young woman abandoned by her family to the successful businesswoman I'd become. The pain of their rejection had been devastating at the time, but it had also forced me to develop strength, independence, and discernment that I wouldn't have gained otherwise. Sometimes the greatest gift toxic people can give you is their absence, which creates space for genuine love and success to enter your life. The phone rang, interrupting my reflection. A young woman named Amanda was calling about her elderly grandmother who'd been receiving suspicious visits from people claiming to be conducting insurance inspections. I found your foundation online, Amanda said. My grandmother thinks I'm being paranoid, but something feels wrong about these people. They're asking too many personal questions and taking pictures of her house. The situation sounded familiar, and I immediately began documenting details to share with Detective Rodriguez and our foundation's security consultants. You're not being paranoid, I assured Amanda. Trust your instincts and let's make sure your grandmother is protected. As I prepared to help another family avoid the predators my own family had become, I understood that my painful journey wasn't just about personal survival. It had been about becoming strong enough and knowledgeable enough to protect others from the same predators who'd once tried to destroy me. Standing in my office, looking at photographs of properties I managed and families I'd helped, I realized that success isn't just about accumulating wealth or achieving personal goals. Real success means using your strengths to protect people who can't protect themselves and creating opportunities for others to build their own foundations of security and independence. My family had tried to take everything from me, but they'd actually given me something far more valuable, the wisdom to recognize genuine relationships, the strength to build something meaningful from nothing, and the courage to fight back when threatened by people who don't deserve access to your life. The rain outside was ending and sunset was painting the Denver skyline in shades of gold and orange. I had dinner plans with Thomas, a client meeting tomorrow morning, and foundation work to review over the weekend. But tonight I was simply grateful for the chosen family, meaningful work, and peaceful life that had grown from the ashes of the biological family that abandoned me. Sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful from the pieces they tried to break. Have you ever had to cut toxic family members out of your life to protect your own success and well-being? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below about how you found the strength to choose your own path when family relationships became destructive. Please like this story if it resonated with your own experiences. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming family drama and building independence. And share this with someone who might need encouragement to prioritize their own growth over toxic family expectations. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that sometimes the family you choose is more valuable than the family you're born into. May you always have the courage to protect your peace and build the life you deserve regardless of who tries to stand in your way.